Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today, our presenter, the Head of Professional Services, Giles Garnett, will be showing you how to build the perfect database from LinkedIn. Me, Jen, the Head of Customer Support, will be answering your questions via live chat. At the end, as always, we will have Q&A with Giles. So let's begin.
Thank you, Jin, and hello and good morning and good afternoon or good evening even to you wherever you may be in the world. And thank you for joining us for the latest in our series of Dux-Soup webinars. I have to take my glasses off, I can't see. It must be an age thing. My name's Giles and I'm Head of Professional Services here at Dux-Soup, and you've just heard from Jin, our Head of Customer Support. And I've been presenting these webinars for the last 3 years or so, and hopefully bring you all the experience that I've gathered during that time, my first-hand experience in lead gen activities as well. Today, we're going to go a little bit back to basics and talk about data and what data you can get from LinkedIn using Dux-Soup. And as I go through this subject, I hope that this will help you understand what data is important to you and how you can collect this data, and then finally what you can do with that data. Got some different options as to how to handle the data in question, depending on whether you have Dux-Soup Pro or Dux-Soup Turbo. So I'm going to be covering a bit on both editions to some extent during the webinar today. While I'm presenting and talking, please raise any questions you have via the question box. It's not the chat box, it's the question box. I always get that wrong. And Jen will do her best to answer them, and any of those that are applicable. If they're appropriate, I'll try and answer those at the end of the webinar, yeah, try to keep your questions on topic. As always, before the questions come in, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to made available to you in the coming hours if you're registered, or via our website and YouTube channel in the next day or two. Yeah, very briefly, because I know we always have a few, anybody who's new to Dux-Soup, who's not used Dux-Soup before, I'll just do a quick one-page introduction. What is Dux-Soup? It's a Chrome extension that helps you to automate your lead generation activities in LinkedIn. Works by mimicking human behavior on the platform and gives you the possibility to harness the power of LinkedIn by automating such actions as auto-visiting profiles, sending connection requests, sending in-mails, and even endorsing skills. If you've got Turbo edition of Dux-Soup, you have even more possibilities available where you can build, edit, and track campaigns, enroll your prospects into campaigns, and even integrate with other platforms. What's really important there is the human behavior aspect from keeping your LinkedIn account safe point of view. There's lots of blog posts and information on our website, so please do feel free to just go to dux-soup.com and have a look at the resources page there. I'll show it a bit later in the webinar, but that's where you can find out all that information as well. So on to the topic of the day, data. What's data and why is it so important? Well, the data that you see about people on your laptop will drive the decisions as to how to handle them or indeed approach them. And the more data you have, the better informed your decision will be. And the more informed you have and the better quality of data you have is the greater the likelihood of getting a positive reaction from your prospects. It's all about the more you know, the more prepared you can be. And there are now somewhere over 380 million LinkedIn users. I put 840, 830 it should be, my apologies. There's over 58 million registered companies. It's a huge amount of data there. And yeah, every time you or Dux-Soup visits a profile in LinkedIn, the data relating to that profile is saved for you in your browser cache, ready for you to download. So whatever you've been doing in LinkedIn, be that inviting people, visiting, enrolling profiles into campaigns, sending messages, or even just scanning lists, there will be data stored for you in the browser. So the key question then, of course, is how do you get that data? So how you download your data from Dux-Soup is very, very straightforward. From within a LinkedIn page, use the Dux-Soup drop-down box and hit download data in the top right-hand corner. And that downloads your data as a CSV file. I will walk through this a little bit later during the presentation. There are some other options if you've got Turbo, but if you want to gather your historic data, go to the download button here. There are some other options if you've got Turbo, as I say, there as well. You would do the same thing if you're collecting email addresses. So if you're using Dux points to collect email addresses, you would do exactly the same. You go to the drop-down box and you hit download data. If you're using Turbo, you can collect this data automatically using the webhook function. And if you're using Pipedrive or HubSpot as well, the email addresses will appear within the CRM of your choice. And similarly that way as well. Another one to be aware of is, and I'll show this a little bit later in the slides, sorry, in the demonstration as well, with the latest version of Dux-Soup, if you've got Turbo, you can now download a lot of data from within the funnel flow as well. So in the funnel flow, there are some download data options there as well, again, only available for Turbo users. So we're talking about data, but there are different types of data. There's different sets of data available to you. And you need to be aware of what data you want. So you can get different types of data depending on what you do and where you do it. So you've got both scanning and visiting. So whenever you send a message to somebody, or whenever you send a connection request, or whenever you do an auto visit, that counts as a visit, and that data is gathered. We also in Dux-Soup have the opportunity to scan lists. Scanning gives you somewhat more limited data, and it's great for being able to create a custom list or a quick list of profiles, and could be as a starting point. There are variations in the data that you get when you do scanning, depending on what list you scan. And when I talk about lists, I mean, is it a search result in regular LinkedIn? Is it a list of people who've reacted to a post? Is it a search result in Sales Navigator? Is it a list of group members in regular LinkedIn? Is it an alumni list, etc., etc.? The different lists will give you slightly different data, but essentially you get the first name, the last name, and the URL, and those are the main things. When you visit data, you get much more extensive data, which is useful for populating or enhancing your database. And what data is available depends upon the platform that you're using. Well, if you're using regular LinkedIn, that opens the regular LinkedIn URL, and therefore you get a certain amount of data there. If you're using Sales Navigator or Recruiter, when you open the profiles in those platforms, you get slightly different data. And all of that is outlined here in this article under our support pages, the visiting versus scanning versus visiting article. We'll maybe try and have a look at that one a little bit later. And when you press that download data button, you always get the option that you're going to download your scan data or your visit data. With the visit data, you have also the option to include extended data, including your skills and positions and education history as well. So there's lots and lots of things there. So if we now just drill down a little bit further, when you're visiting profiles, this is the sort of data that you can gather. There are some other bits in here, but I've tried to cover the main things that I think you will need within your database or your reciprocal of data, because a lot of people use spreadsheets for storing their data. That's not technically a database, but it's one way of handling the data, and a very common one. You can just basically use it as a tracking sheet, for example. But when we're talking about database, we're talking about a CRM or whatever it is that you may use, whatever platform of choice. So the things that we look at always are the first name, the last name, the industry and the company, and the location and the job title. Those are sort of the key elements of data that you'll require per user. Then you've got the sort of slightly more, should we say, extended data regarding personalization and stuff. It's the email address and the phone number, very useful for some people. Connection level is also useful. You get first, second, or third degree connection. And then the various URLs. So that can be the LinkedIn URL, the Sales Navigator, the Recruiter, even the company URL and the company LinkedIn URL. You'll also be able to gather, for example, Twitter handles and middle name, etc., etc. And there are one or two others which we'll come on to a bit later. As well as those, you also get, when you download your visit data, you get Dux-Soup tags and notes. If they've got a personal website, instant messenger handle, and then, as I talked about it earlier, the skills, their job history, and their education. So all of that information is available from every profile that you visit. And yeah, it's there sitting in the browser cache, ready for you to download as and when you need it. When we're talking about data and building a database, though, one of the important things to remember is how do you identify that record in your database? And what you'll find is that when you, and we can show you this in the next slide as well, when you download your data, you'll notice that every line also has what we call an ID. And that is the unique, we can use that as your unique key within your database to help you find the data. So when you're trying to find duplicate records and that sort of stuff, when you're a bit looking to make sure that you're merging records together, then yeah, you can use the LinkedIn ID, as we call it, as your unique identifier. And that's available if you scan lists, if you visit profiles in all of the platforms, and use that as your unique key in the database. And you'll see the format there, it's ID dot and then a series of numbers. And you'll see that in a second as well. But that is what I would always recommend using as your unique key within your database, or whatever platform it is that you're using. It's what we use when we've built our integrations with HubSpot and with Pipedrive, for example. That is how we identify where messages go, etc., against the correct record. So that's a really important thing there. That's why I wanted to highlight it separate to the other data that we talked about just now. So here we have a sample list, and we'll show you some real life examples in a minute as well, of doing just a scan within regular LinkedIn here. And what you see here, the sort of level of information you get. I've got the ID, so that LinkedIn ID, that unique number, the timestamp as to when I scanned the data, the URL of the target. In this case, it's come from regular LinkedIn, because I can tell that because it's a regular LinkedIn URL, first name, last name. And in this case, I think this was from a search result, it was, yeah. You get the job title and their location. Now, if I scan this in a different list, I'll get slightly different information, but essentially there's enough here to be able to then, create my own custom list and use the revisit function within Dux-Soup to target the people that I really want. So that's some scan data there. That's how that looks. If I then look at visit data, and this is just a very small snapshot of a very large spreadsheet. So again, here we see we've got the ID, so that unique identifier is still there. I've got the visit time, the time that I visited them, and then I've got profile and sales profile, because in this spreadsheet I was visiting both regular LinkedIn profiles and Sales Navigator profiles, so that's why I've got two different columns there. And then you'll notice I've also got the URL to their picture, and then I've got the degree. Are they a first, second, or third degree connection? And you'll see there's a slight difference in the formatting there, and that's because in Sales Navigator you get a slightly different format to within regular LinkedIn. First name, middle name, last name. The number of connections they have. This can be a really useful one. How big is their network? How interesting are they? Now, where you see that it's 500, that means that it's more than 500 in regular LinkedIn. You'll notice that these two here, the second and third lines there, they've both got 500. If you visit a profile with over 500 connections in regular LinkedIn, you just see the 500. You don't see beyond that. You have to visit them within Sales Navigator to see the actual number, as you can see from this line here, this Richard person here. I get the summary, I get how long they've worked, where they've worked, and in what job. I get their company URL, if it's available, email address, phone number, instant messenger, Twitter, location, industry, and then tags, etc. Beyond that, you then come to the extended data. So that would be the job history, employment history, their skills, and indeed their education. So all of this information is available in that CSV file, as mentioned. Now, depending on your chosen platform, then after you've carried out all your activities, you could then download your CSV file and import that into your database, which is perfectly valid and reasonable. But with Turbo, you can automate the collection of that data and have all the correct fields in your database populated using webhooks in real time. So remember that when you're doing the activities through Pro, or you're doing the download data, it's always looking at the history. With Turbo, you can do it in real time and have the webhook data just populate your database in real time. And then if you're also using that that way, and you can also do this, I guess, to some degree, if you use, for example, VLOOKUP in a spreadsheet, and you can map across and do a lookup against the ID as a VLOOKUP. You could then also use incoming messages, and no, you can't do that. No, that's incorrect. With Turbo, you can gather message data and have that mapped against the appropriate record in your database. But yeah, these various options there are available to you depending on how you choose to use it. Right, enough of me talking without demonstrating. Let's actually show you something here tangible. So here I've got a search results within Sales Navigator here, and if I just click on my Dux-Soup icon here, and if I go to my download data button here, what we can see here is I've got an amount of scan data and visit data that I can open. If I open the scan data file or download the scan data file, you'd normally open this correctly. I'm going to do this quick and dirty just for now, just so I can show you what the data looks like. So we have here, we can see here, I've got the ID, the scan time, the profile, first name, last name, and job title. In some cases, I don't have the location because I think I started scanning some of these through the other platform. But that's how a scan profile looks. And then if I do the same but with my visit data, if I click the download data button here and I go to my visit data, let's have a look at that a second, and we'll go right down to the bottom to see some of the most recently visited ones perhaps. So here we can see, should we zoom in a bit perhaps? I think it's probably, let's make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So here you can see the sort of data you get, the ID, the visit time, the profile, all of those bits that I mentioned before. And then we get to location, industry, tags, and then all of the skills, the positions that people have held in what companies. All of this information you can use to supplement your database going forward. And you say it depends on how much data there is in there. We can see somebody's obviously got a lot of information in there. We can always then go through to the education here as well, and all of that information is available to you then to download. So that's our visit and scan data there. Now, sometimes what you need to consider is, you see here I've got 356 lines, 336 profiles recorded here. One thing to consider is that periodically, and I've seen this when it gets to sort of between 6,000 and 8,000, we tend to find that the file gets really big. So what I always recommend is regularly downloading your data and then periodically clearing your data. So until you clear, the clear data button there will only clear the cached data. It doesn't clear any of your history in Dux-Soup. It doesn't clear anything like that. It purely clears your cached data in the browser. And that's important to remember. I think it does there, I say, resets the recorder, does not affect visit history. Worth remembering that, because some people panic when you look at the clear data. Before you clear your data, always download your data. So what we have there is the different ways that we can download our data there. Now, if we look at this from a slightly more advanced point of view, from a turbo perspective, what I did earlier was I took a search result here and I scanned that search result and I put that scan into a spreadsheet here. And you can see here I've got a number of different fields here that I've just put into this spreadsheet. I've got the LinkedIn ID, I've got the first name, last name, and then I've got some info, and that came from the scan. And what I've done then, just as an example, in order to just demonstrate how straightforward this is, I've built a very quick Zap to basically capture further information once I've visited these profiles. So here I've got my scan, and I've got a series of number of lines here. So I can see here that Nicholas, Carolina, Sven, Braham, and Olivier, I've visited them because I've got extra information here now against them. So what I've done here is I've basically created the start of a database, except it's in spreadsheet format. And what I've done here is I've built myself a very quick Zap. Let's just open the Zap to show you. There we go. I built a very quick Zap here to just do to capture visit data in Dux-Soup, to do a look up against that spreadsheet to see if that person exists in there, looking up against their LinkedIn ID, and then when it finds a matching line, updating that spreadsheet row in Google Sheets. So if I now go to my regular LinkedIn where I scanned this list from, and I just now go and do some regular visits here. It's going to skip over a few because I've already visited them earlier today when I was preparing this. In a second, it'll visit a profile, it'll open that profile, and what we'll see is that the additional data that I've defined in my Zap to have appear in my spreadsheet will appear. So it's opening this profile here for Kelly. If I go to my spreadsheet here, what we'll see in a second is the data from that particular visit appear here. There we go. We can see there that I've now visited that person, and I can see that it's actually updated this accordingly. I can see where she works. I can see what her job title is. If she had an email address, I'd see it there. I can see what her location is, and I've put in there also what her connection level is with me and when I visited her. So that way I can then visit profiles that I've defined already. Here, just proving that by looking up by the ID here, the column A there, the LinkedIn ID, I'm using that as the unique identifier. I can then populate supplementary information against that particular profile in a really streamlined way. We now see it's now going to visit the next person on the list, and what we'll see in a second is that for Maurice here, this next person here, that information will get put in there as well. And if you're using Turbo, you can then use the power of webhooks to, for example, there we go, just had another one appear there. You can use the power of the webhook functionality in order to put more information against that. So for example, we've done webinars before where you can build a tracking spreadsheet where you can actually see the message exchanges as well. As long as you've got that LinkedIn ID, that column there that I've got there to do the lookup against. And now I've also set this up, this particular Zap, so that if it doesn't find the person who I'm visiting on this list here, it will actually create a new line. If we go to the very bottom here, so these two bottom ones here, they weren't in my original list, so it's actually now just created a new line against each of them. But what I did here was I wanted to just prove how easy it is to set that up. It's quite a straightforward activity. I've done the visit profile event in Dux-Soup. I've done the lookup spreadsheet row in Google Sheets. If it finds one, go to that specific row and then update the spreadsheet row. And it's all very intuitive through Zapier, very similar in Make as well. And a similar sort of theory exists with each of the CRMs that you'll be using as well. So if you're using, I don't know, Salesforce or Zoho or one of the other widely used CRM databases, you would do the same thing. You would make sure that you got that LinkedIn ID field. You do the lookup against that LinkedIn ID, and then you would either add supplementary information or create a new record or a new contact, depending on what the definition is within there. So that's how you can do that from there. Another thing to show you as well, and this is a relatively recent implementation in Dux-Soup. If I go to the Dux Dash, and this again is only available for Turbo users, so just be aware, sorry, Pro users. If you go to your drip campaign, if you go to your funnel flows even, when you're in the funnel flow here, what you'll notice is we now have the ability to be able to grab all the information from within the funnel flow. So what we can do here is if we take, for example, who's responded, so wait for that to update a second. Any second now. It will update. No, really it will. Oh dear. Wait. It will update in a second. We'll come back to it, maybe because I've still got the robot running here. Let's stop the robot there for a second. That might help. There we go. So I've now got my 57 prospects and conversations. If I now, for example, want to grab that information, if I copy that, I've choose which segment I want to copy, and I want to copy my responded ones. If I now go to my spreadsheet here, I'm just going to create a new, to get to a new spreadsheet. If I now paste that information into there, what we can see there is all of the people who've responded to me. What I get then is I get their LinkedIn ID, I get their first name, their last name, the URL of their profile, job title, where they work, and their location and their industry. So all of that information is available as a snapshot, just like that, from within the funnel flow. And here we can see my 57 people who've responded, their details, and that can be a really handy way then to put information into my database or to update information against those people, depending on what platform I'm using. Right, let's go back to the slides very quickly. So just in summary, and I know this is relatively brief topic today, but it's really a case of just making sure that you're aware of the data that you can use and how you can get that data. be clear with your processes. What data do you want, where and when? You know, always think about, you know, if you want to keep continuity of data, it only takes one break in the chain for you to lose that continuity. I always personally save more data than I probably will ever use, but I know that I always have it there if I need it. Pro users, you'll need a slightly more manual process to require to download your data. You can only look at your historical data. For turbo users, you've got a lot more options to automatically populate data in your required location using webhooks. And then alongside with, in conjunction with Make or Zoho would be the obvious ways there. So think about all of the data that you can gather, where you want it to be, what you're going to do with it. Remember also the types of data. If you're visiting first degree connections, you are far more likely to get email addresses than if you're visiting second and third degree connections, unless you're using Dux points as well. So that's always a possibility there as well. Okay, very briefly, in 2 weeks' time, yes, that's the 23rd of August, we're going to be revisiting some stuff around the Pipedrive integration. We're going to have a look at the Pipedrive integration and sort of get our fingers behind that a little bit more, talking about enrollment into campaigns from within Pipedrive, how you can make that really work for you from within Pipedrive. Pipedrive was the first of our CRM integrations, our direct integrations. So I think it's a good idea. It's been there for about 18 months now. So it's good to revisit that and just sort of have a review and see where we're doing. It's a very widely used integration. Yeah, we'll have a look at that one in 2 weeks' time. Jin, do we have any questions?
Yes, I have one question. So just which came in just now. One of the users is asking, can you collect data to Salesforce? Can you transfer responded messages to Salesforce?
Yes, you can. Now, you would have to do that via Zapier or Make, and you would need to create some custom fields within Salesforce in order for that to happen. And while I'm talking, I have a feeling we maybe have covered this in a previous webinar. Do you remember, Jin? I think we did, didn't we?
I think we did, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'll tell you what, let's see if we can find it. I suspect if we go in here, yes, so here we did a blog where there's a webinar as well. We actually, it's easier to probably digest the blog, to be fair. It's fairly easy read through. So with Salesforce, what we did here, we went through how you can create a new contact in Salesforce using Dux-Soup and add a new task when you receive an incoming message in LinkedIn, and then automatically adding first degree connections into Salesforce. So there's a walkthrough here as to how you can create your custom field for that LinkedIn ID, because that's the crucial thing that you need there. It's all here as a step-by-step guide. Maybe you can put the URL of that that particular blog into the responses. Or maybe I can do that myself into the. Let's see if we can do that. No, I don't think I can.
Oh, I'll do it. Just let me just. This is the.
That might have worked. I'm not sure. But yes, that's how you do it. That's the place to go. Yes, it can be done with Salesforce, and to be honest, you can do the copy paste with pretty much any CRM. You'll find some of the terminology is slightly different about records, objects, contacts, the different terminology there. But use that LinkedIn ID as your unique key within your database, and that's the way to go. And yeah, we talk through here. We walk through this here, and then we even go through the webhook stuff as well. So some of the webhook stuff it looks slightly different because they've updated the Zapier integration. So they've updated the Zapier user interface a little bit, so it looks a little bit different there. But you can see here there's how you do the lookup against the ID, etc., etc., and how you then have the message match up against the profile that's in there. So that's all a step-by-step guide there within a blog post from last year. Have any other questions, Jim?
Thank you very much. Just a quick one. Would you recommend using the funnel view and then export copy data to a spreadsheet and import it into a CRM, or would you rather use a Zap with the on-message event or transferring data?
Personally, I would use Zapier or Make. The reason for that is because it's in real time, and there's as long as everything's set up correctly in the first place, it's a repeated process. If you're doing the copy paste thing yourself, there's always the element of human error, of remembering to do it on time and remembering, oh, which date have I done or whatever. So, if you think about the copy paste from the Dux Dash here, depending on what date range you've got and everything, personally, I would use webhooks and Zapier, just because that's what I'm most familiar with, and I use it in my day-to-day work all the time. That to me is a more sustainable process in the long term. Maybe as a short-term step to learn what data you want to be and where, the copy and pasting thing would work. But I think in the longer term, you would want something that would be more robust, more repeatable, and less likely to be missed. And if you've got a webhook there, if you're familiar with Zapier and you're confident with that, then that would be my preferred way of operating, I think. Of course, for some people, they don't want the added expense of Zapier, so that manual option is always there. And it depends on how many processes you have, how many zaps you're running, etc., as to what your investment is required in Zapier. So there's always a cost benefit activity that needs to go on there in order to make sure that you're making that right decision. So yeah, just saying from my point of view that I think for a repeatable process, I would go down the Zapier route. Anything else, Jim?
No, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right, back to the slides. Where were we? That one there. So another quick reminder, 2 weeks time, we'll be touching on Pipedrive. One of my favorite subjects, that, because yeah, I was doing that first integration was quite good fun. So yeah, that's going to be quite familiar and covering some good stuff there. Yeah, it's a widely used CRM. Just a reminder, if you want booster or technical calls and consultancy time with myself, you can book those via the support team. So please feel free to do that. Reach out to our support team, info@dux-soup.com. There's the email address, and I will speak to you all in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.